They just didn't do it the way that I would do it. And so, we take these assumptions, we take these frustrations, and oftentimes we don't communicate them. Going back to, we have to really be effective in how we're delivering the expectations and the communication, but we've got to go back, especially in the infancy or the correction period in a relationship with a team member, to ensure that we are consistent with it. One of the things that doesn't happen frequently enough is the consistency and follow through, the consistency in team meetings or huddles. And when we demonstrate inconsistencies to our team, it's easy for them to not take us seriously, whether consciously or subconsciously.
Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated. What if you could hang out with successful small and solo law firm attorneys, ask them about their successes and failures, their business strategies and mindset habits, then take an insight or two to guide your own growth in your practice? Each week, Steve Riley shares an in-depth look at how to work less while maintaining high client service standards, reduce your stress levels while growing your income, and find time to make changes when you are time-starved. Steve is a lawyer coach for more than 20 years and a former trial attorney. His goal is to provide strategies to help you balance your lives and grow your practice. Now, here's Steve.
Hi, Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. In this particular episode, I'm bringing back a dear friend, one of our star practice advisors, who is going to help us think about a particular issue. And it really came out of her last podcast, which was called Why I Love Conflict. So I brought Lori Pulvermacher back to help us wrestle through how to reduce the risk of conflict, how to hold people accountable, how to have impromptu, unexpected conversations, and give us some practical tips to working well collaboratively with our team. So with that, Lori, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's always an honor.
It's great to have you here. Your last episode, Why I Love Conflict. I'm giggling because anyone who meets you would never see you as a person who seeks out conflict. You don't come across as, all the years I've known you, I think we're going on an 18-year relationship now. I've never seen you be conflict adverse, but I've never seen you being the type of person whose communication skills are so poor that you lead with conflict. You usually lead with grace, elegance, and thought. And so that's one of the things I love about you. And it's one of the reasons I'm inviting you back to the podcast, because I can be really awkward. I can be very clumsy. I can say really stupid things in the moment. Now, none of the audience members probably make the same mistakes I do, maybe one or two, but I was hoping that you could come back and give us some tips, strategies, and approaches to help us all be better at avoiding conflict, but yet communicating in an effective way with our team members, with our peers, with our bosses when we miss expectations. Their expectations are expectations.
Yeah.
So I've got a big table set for you today. You up for it?
Let's do this. This is fun. And this is one of those topics that I really do love talking about, not because I naturally love conflict. And I think that's the important thing to recognize and acknowledge, is that most of us are conflict adverse. It is not something that we look forward to. It's not anything that we want to engage in typically. And for a percentage of us, it is something that we will avoid on all costs. But what we're talking about today, Steve, is the context of law firm owners, partners, and even team members who have to work collaboratively and who need to be able to communicate effectively to ensure that objectives are met and client experiences are positive. And so you mentioned it. It's not trying to identify and lean into the conflict necessarily. It's trying to amplify the effectiveness of our communication and recognizing that communication and conflict are not exclusive of each other. We're going to have organic conflict. We're going to have conflict that arises out of certain situations and circumstances. And we're going to have conflict that we need to push or lean into to benefit a scenario that we might be in. But there's so many different contexts of conflict. So I want to just share with the listeners that there's other ways to think of conflict, because conflict, when we say the word, automatically has that negative connotation. And I want us to look at this more as, again, elevating or leveling up our communication, or improving the way in which we approach challenges.
That's perfect. I want to reframe one element of the conversation, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
I've always joked that lawyers are lions in the courtroom and lambs in the office. So be in front of a jury, go in front of a judge, advocate for your client. Lawyers are generally well trained for that, and they're badasses at it. But when they go outside of the courtroom, where the context shifts, at home, dealing with clients, dealing with an upset client, dealing with team members, trying to communicate to a team member why something doesn't work, like being late or not returning a phone call, they turn into big old lambs because they're not sure how to address these issues. So when you're, as a lawyer or team member or paralegal, as you listen for this, I want you to listen to it in all aspects of your life, not just advocating for a client, but client service, managing expectations, communicating with your team members, communicating with your direct supervisor. Listen for ways that you can improve the effectiveness. And I like the way you said that, the effectiveness of your communication, Lori. So that's terrific. So is that okay with you, Lori?
It is. And I'll just, piggyback off that a little bit to just say, one of the biggest challenges we have with communication is the belief that communication actually happened or transpired. And again, you talk about the lion in the courtroom, lamb in the office type of situation. We have a tendency, especially depending on your disc style and your experience in a managerial position, but we have a tendency to dilute or over soften our communication because we're not really sure, one, how it's going to land with the other person, or two, if we're going to be able to deliver that message effectively or control our own feelings and emotions in the moment. So, when I'm talking with business owners and managers, and they have a conflict situation or a staff challenge, I often want to peel back all those layers to really understand what communication transpired. And again, what we find is there was too much dilution of that message.
It's so true. It's so true. I remember two partners, one agreed to fire somebody and then met with the person. And then we had a conference call later that evening where they said, okay, did you have the conversation? How did it go? Yeah, I had the conversation. It went really, really well. Okay, good. Did they clear out their desk? No. There's a possibility they might be coming to work tomorrow. And I'm like, well, what happened? What happened to you're going to terminate this person? You had a script, everything. Yeah, I felt bad. I wasn't really sure. And so what did you exactly say? And then you work for the words for words. And I'm like, okay, that was, it's one thing to be subtle. That's another thing to hide the ball, right? And so, and not hurt their feelings. So it's you're nailing a big issue, which is let's peel it back. So I'm gonna walk through 3 mistakes I've made. Hopefully I don't continue to make these, but one particular mistake that I usually make is not investing time in the communication, like rushing. 2, assuming that once I said something, the communication actually occurred. Like you said, it actually went through. And 3, the fact that I've said something and showed something to somebody once, they now understand completely what my expectations are.
Osmosis, right?
Yeah. So I've said this, and therefore they know exactly, they've like psychically communicated. So this is one of the challenges that, I thought it, and therefore you should understand it. So I think probably the biggest challenge, and you're really good at talking about this, is communicating expectations. And I've done a podcast in the past, or an episode in the past, with Glenn Finch on expectations. I'll put that in the show notes. But it seems like it begins with expectations. So talk to me more about your perception of that.
Yeah, and it's when we again this expectations has so many different contexts associated with it also. So as the listeners are going through this, you envision your own definition of these words and kind of the situations that you've been in. But setting expectations is communication, and essentially what we're trying to do is influence others. We're trying to impact an outcome. And if we're going to be effective leaders and managers, and this doesn't just mean in the context of firm ownership or I have somebody that is a direct report to me, but leaders must leverage that communication ability to set strong expectations. And so some of the things that I would recommend to ensure that is happening is, one, we've got to be direct. We can't be overly indirect, as I alluded to, and diluted or over soften, especially when we really want to ensure that there is an agreement and alignment of what needs to be done. And how we are measuring success. And so we want to make sure that we're incorporating that type of language. So this is going to be effective. This is going to be successful if this is the outcome. And the other piece of this you alluded to a moment ago, Steve, is regular check-ins, FaceTime with your team members. All too often, we are in the whirlwind of our day as managers and owners, and we just, the most important work I can do is the work that's in front of me right now. I know I should be talking to a team member. I know I need to check in on something I've delegated, but that's the easy thing to avoid. That's the easy thing to just let go. And again, we just make assumptions. I had the benefit years ago of having some very strong and well-intended leaders in my life who I reported to, who gave me critical and crucial feedback on my own management style. And one of the biggest mistakes I made as a manager is a little bit of what you said, Steve, but further was making the assumption that people are going to act the way that we will act, execute the way that we would, talk the way that we would, write the way that we would. And my biggest frustration in my early management years was that people did not do that. They just didn't do it the way that I would do it. And so, we take these assumptions, we take these frustrations, and oftentimes we don't communicate them. So, going back to, we have to really be effective in how we're delivering the expectations and the communication, but we've got to go back, especially in the infancy or the correction period in a relationship with a team member, to ensure that we are consistent with it. One of the things that doesn't happen frequently enough is the consistency and follow through, the consistency in team meetings or huddles. And when we demonstrate inconsistencies to our team, it's easy for them to not take us seriously, whether consciously or subconsciously.
I think you're giving, at least me, a lot of credit here. And I think the biggest mistake I've made, as we talk about it and we're thinking it through, is not being clear on my expectation. In doing workshops to dominate your market back in the days when I led practice growth, I still coach. Probably the biggest thing I have to do is help my clients and help myself just slow down and say in writing, or maybe even scratch it out on paper, what are the expectations? And for me, I think that's probably the first place that you started to work with. So what is the expectation? And have clarity around the expectation, and then be able to communicate those expectations. And then, like you said, train and follow up on the expectation. So one of the big mistakes I've made, and what you said is perfect and brilliant, but I'm like going, as I think about it, I mess up all the time on the area of unstated expectation, where just what you said, they're like me, they should do this, or they know what to do. Of course they know what to do. Of course. Now, 31 years of marriage has also helped me learn that unmet expectations, unstated expectations can be the source of a lot of conflict. If I don't get clear on what my wife expects during the holidays, if I don't get clear on what my wife expects during birthdays, if I don't get clear on what my wife expects, part of my job is to actually get clear with her on her expectations. So we really spend a lot of time saying, what are you expecting the holidays to look like? What are you expecting your birthday to look like? And moving beyond, well, you should know, to here's what my expectations are. And for some folks, in my case, and sometimes in my wife's case, we may not be clear. We may have thought about what those expectations are. So it all begins, I guess, with expectations. And
we have to be objective too, to recognize, do I have any bias? Do I have any frustrations that I haven't communicated? Because sometimes, again, we take that into those conversations, we take that into that scenario, and we do want to put a lot of burden on the individual to rise up to the occasion and to outperform expectations, and organically hope that's going to happen, without giving them all of the ammunition they need to truly be successful. And especially if this is a situation where there's trust that's lacking, or this individual is maybe trying to rebound from an error or an incident, you take that into that next conversation, the next scenario. And whether you realize it or not, you might be limiting the effective delivery of communication, or you might be limiting the resources that you're giving to them, almost because it's like, I just want to test this a little bit. But also there's a big piece of, that we naturally find with managers is their inability to delegate certain things. And so if we're not fully empowering our team in certain aspects of their role, we're always going to find ways to limit them or limit their full potential, and find inconsistencies in how we really leverage them. And if we're only willing to give them pieces of things, it makes it even more difficult to communicate effectively what piece of something they own.
Okay, I got a tough one for you. You ready?
Okay.
This is a difficult one. It's been difficult for me. I've dealt with this issue many, many times. As a man who sometimes gets in managerial and leadership roles, one of the biggest weird spots I've discovered is what we'll call dress code conflicts. And how do you communicate your expectations to a younger woman in particular, where their dress code may be appropriate for a dance club, but not appropriate for law firm? And how do you communicate these things without getting yourself in a whole mess of trouble? Look, there's two things that are very difficult for me to do. Like when I go to programs, when we go to our summit, whenever I go to conferences, I'm hesitant to hug some of my long-term friends like you, unless you initiate the hug. And I'm hesitant to compliment you on attire for fear of somebody misinterpreting that. Like, your hair looks fantastic. You've got a great dress on. I'm afraid to say anything anymore. So then just being able to say that to a long-term friend makes you really uncomfortable as a man. And then if you turn around to a young lady who's been in your employment, let's say a year, maybe less than a year, maybe 6 weeks, and they're dressed, let's just say what you would consider inappropriately for a law firm, how do I even begin with this conversation? Do I walk in and go, "Good to see you too," and run right by the desk, or what do I do? What do I do?
Most do exactly that, and this comes up often with the individual private work that I do with attorneys, because again, this is one of those, I don't know how to say it, I don't know how it's going to be perceived, and there's always the how are they going to respond to it, and I will kind of put an overshadowing of all of this with the current employment climate that we have right now. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but that's a big piece too of why individuals are not leaning into conflict right now and not saying the things that they really should be saying, because there's fear of, well, they're going to quit and then I have an open position and I have to start all over. So like I said, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but certainly there's the too casual. I've had firms and individuals who are concerned about tattoos. I've had individuals that have concerns about whether or not something is, again, too casual, too revealing, too crumpled or sloppy or dirty. Or I had an attorney I worked with years ago who had an individual who they felt was really coming in with clothes that hadn't been washed. And again, how do you address these things? So I think the first and foremost, we have to recognize that norms have evolved. I mean, that's just the reality of it. We have become a more casual society, and that's not just in law, that's all industries and across the board. And we also have to recognize that there's generational differences and different varying perspectives on what is professional attire, or what does business or business casual mean. Okay, so I think it's important to ensure that we, again, are effectively communicating, and we can do that by giving specific indication as to what's acceptable and what's desired. And we want to make this a win-win situation, meaning if we have a positive experience, it elevates the professional appearance of our firm in the community with our clients. It ensures that we are providing a professional service viewpoint to those that interact with us, and we have a cohesiveness as a team where we all are kind of under those same norms. But I think, again, it's very important that we give very clear definitions. So recently I was talking with an attorney, and in their policy, in their guidebook, they removed the word casual from business casual, because formerly they thought business casual would be acceptable. She felt that the term casual was being leaned in too much, and so removed casual from that. I have another attorney who is in the process right now of purchasing clothing for her team. And so she has identified styles that she's okay with, and giving variety in colors to her team. And she is providing a certain number of clothes or shirt options for them, and then giving them the information for the company so that the team members can purchase additional items if they want. So yes, there's an investment in that, but also for her, it's removing the headache, because this is a fight that she's been, a part of for far too long, and it's consuming too much of her energy and frustration, quite frankly. So, again, generational norms and evolution in our society, making things more casual. People want expression of style and wardrobe, and that's a big piece of not wanting to limit that. But I think it's important to set these expectations in the very beginning, meaning if I'm interviewing a candidate, I'm looking at what they're wearing to that interview as an example of what I might be able to expect them to show up to work in. And so if I'm less than satisfied in their interview wardrobe, it might be an indication of what they're going to wear day to day. You also want to perhaps have that conversation in there. This is a professional setting. These are the dress attire expectations or policies that we have in place. Is there anything that would prevent you from adhering to that? Is that a concern for you? By asking those questions during the interview process, you very early are planting the seed for that expectation, but you also might have a candidate that will self-select out because they don't want that degree of rigidness or strictness, if you would, of limitation. So that might help for individuals coming in. If you've got individuals who are, again, not adhering to the dress code desire you want, make sure that you have a formal policy on it. Document this, have something that you can refer back to. And then if somebody is, not adhering to your desired dress code, whether stated or unstated, again, did communication actually happen? Have that conversation with them privately. Again, state expectations, give examples. I know a firm that has kind of a guidebook with pictures. These are appropriate types of clothing options. These are not appropriate clothing options. I know some firms that are okay with long sleeve blouses, but wouldn't be okay with cutouts of the shoulder, as an example. So again, there's so many different varying norms, if you would. And one, you may need to lighten up your expectation if it's extremely formal. But two, don't reduce your standards. If you truly want a strong professional image and you want everyone to convey that in your office, you can and should have the right to do so. But again, you're going to have to be extremely clear.
Hi, Steve. Sorry to interrupt this episode, but if you're new to Atticus and you're listening to our podcast and you don't understand how a practice advisor works, in this particular case, you're listening to an interview that features a practice advisor who's really coaching and advising someone how to grow their practice. If you're curious on how to work with a practice advisor, I'm going to put a link in the show notes, and I'm going to give you a complimentary, no-charge practice growth diagnostic. So you can talk to one of our membership directors about how to work with a practice advisor. That if you've never had the opportunity to work one-on-one with one of our top flight practice advisors, I'm going to encourage you, as you listen to this episode, ask yourself, would somebody like this be able to help me and help me grow my practice and help me cultivate a great life? With that, thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode. Well, there's two levels to this, and I'm going to give you a moment to address my first question, which was, how do I have the conversation? I'll tell you 2 ways I've done it in the past, and you can tell me what you think. Number 1 is I didn't have the conversation. I grabbed somebody, a woman on the team, talked to her about it, and realized that she was waiting for me to come in because she was going to be totally entertained with my response to how the woman was dressed. And I said, well, how do you propose to handle this? She was, well, I'll talk to her. But ultimately, we not only talked to her, but took her shopping to do exactly what you said, which was to kind of upgrade her wardrobe for a more professional attire. The second thing I did in the past is I've done a story. And I explained to people that our clients are on a journey, and their journey is a legal one, and they're expecting certain things in their story of how they should be treated in a law firm. They're expecting us to dress in a particular way. They're expecting the entire experience to go down in a particular way. So part of what we have to do is be characters in that story and, perform our roles in that story as to their expectations. And a lot of that is the psychographic and demographic of the prospecting client that you're wrestling with. So I really like, and I do like your idea of, having a picture book, as simple as that sound. Here's what's appropriate, here's not appropriate. But how do I, as a man supervisor, address the inappropriate, or what I perceive to be inappropriateness, of a woman's attire who's my direct, or might be someone who I'm more or less managing? And I'm going to use more or less managing because we both know that I'm not a great manager. So how do I do it? Do I walk in and say, what the heck? Do I walk in, or do I just stay in my office and hope to God she quits? Or what do I do?
Not the latter.
Okay.
And again, this is where we tend to lead with, let's just avoid the situation. Let's hope tomorrow's selection is better than today's, and then I don't have to say anything. But if you're not satisfied with what you're seeing today, or this has been multiple situations, it's going to repeat itself, because, regardless of the size of our closet, we only have so many wardrobe selections. And so we're going to see those pieces repeated over time. So it does need to be addressed. As I mentioned, you want to do so privately. And I think it's important to recognize that there's something, you have a script in your head, Steve, that says, I'm a man. And because I'm a man, it's more difficult for me to have this type of conversation with a woman. It's too easy to venture into, an area that it shouldn't, or it's going to be perceived as wrong because of the difference of genders. So we have to recognize that we can't go into this and say, I'm not the right person to have this conversation because of these other elements, right? So it can be difficult. You can recognize that it's difficult, but you can't allow your gender being the opposite of the individual's to be the thing that stops your concern. You can always bring somebody else into the room with you if it makes you feel more comfortable, but it still needs to be addressed. And I think it can be addressed in a gender neutral way, meaning, here's what I'm observing. And you may very well like the outfit that the individual has on, but that's neither here nor there. It's, here's what I'm observing, and this is what I'm hoping to see going forward. And this is why this is a concern for me. Does this make sense? What concerns do you have? You want to always make sure you're incorporating a lot of questions back into that conversation, because that's going to aid in clarity. It's also going to aid in understanding. An attorney that I worked with went through this scenario, and the individual revealed to her, listen, I'm broke. I can't afford to go out and buy new pieces. The only pieces I'm wearing are the pieces that already exist in my closet, right? That probably wouldn't have been revealed without some probing questions in that conversation, which then would be able to, okay, I can help you. I can provide a stipend. I can take you shopping as you did in your situation. Some people might not venture to offer that because they might, again, perceive that the individual would think that's offensive. But without questioning and opening up dialogue and creating a place of trust, you're never going to reveal the true piece. Is this just their style and we've got to realign on appropriate style? Or is there a financial constraint or something else going on here?
That's perfect. You nailed my first strategy, which is there's no way I'm going to have that conversation, me personally, with that person without another woman present. Number two, most of the time it's not having an understanding of what's appropriate attire. And then number three, it's usually financial stress. Like there's a financial. So I think you nailed all three, which is, okay, if it's a financial issue and this is somebody that's up and coming or a rock star, I'm with you. I have no problem writing a check. Okay, I got another one for you. Ready?
Excellent.
I have lawyers that can walk in front of a jury and ask for multi-million-dollar numbers. I have them say really, really aggressive and mean things to opposing counsel. I've seen them chew people up. However, their legal assistant who's been there for 6 months, 9 months, keeps coming in late, chronically tardy, and then making the same stupid typos over and over and over in documents, spelling clients' names wrong. What do we do?
Well, in a perfect scenario, we would go back in time and we would address this when it was initially happened and not the chronic issue that we have. That lends to the exacerbation of the conflict and the tension associated with having that conversation. And that's also a big part of the definition of micromanagement. When we don't address issues timely, doesn't mean it has to be immediately in the moment, because sometimes we do need to go reflect on it. Sometimes we need to prepare for how we're going to have or shape that conversation. But what we don't do is wait for this thing and then this thing and then this thing. And then finally, like, okay, all of these things have happened. So making sure that we're providing timely feedback and addressing things in the moment is important. If this is a chronic issue, sometimes we feel, now I've given up too much control because I never said anything previously. And now I'm going to say something now that they've been doing this for 6 months. Again, this is your business. This is your team. And individuals who are behaving outside of expectations, norms, and appropriate professional conduct are just bad seeds in the organization, and they serve as an example to the other team members. And when you have rock star employees or really great employees that you want to keep, they will be less than enthusiastic about being a part of a team that accepts low standards for certain individuals. So we have to recognize that, yes, this person might be upset about the conversation. We recognize that I don't really want to have this conversation, but darn it, it's my obligation and my duty and my role to do so. And there have to be, again, the clear expectations, but clear consequences also. What's going to happen if this continues to happen? And you have to follow through on that.
Okay, so there's a couple things you said there that I want to highlight. Number one is the price that you pay in allowing this to continue is that you give permission to your best performers to degrade and downshift their performance to the worst performers. That's right. What you're telling everybody. And that the worst performance is acceptable. The one thing that you also said was timely. So if I've got somebody coming in late or they keep making typos, what do you mean by timely? In the moment, within 24 hours, 48 hours? Give me some more specific advice on that. Timely, what's timely mean?
Yeah, it may be dependent on the situation, but in a tardy situation, there's no reason why that can't be addressed in the moment. If they're supposed to be there at, 7:45 to be ready, at 8 a.m. office opening time, and they're getting in at 8:05, like I'm going to address that then. Hey, noticed you were late today. Right? Everything okay? I want to understand what created that in the moment. Sometimes it's a traffic situation. Sometimes it's a child, daycare drop-off situation. Whatever the reason is, okay, can we just make sure that we're going to, be cognizant about the 7:45 time that we need everyone here, and remind them why that's important, and remind them why those expectations are in place. And then if it's another situation where, okay, now they're late again the next day or they're late again next week, that I want to pull them aside, have a private conversation, but I want to put more burden on them. Oh, we talked about this. Perhaps I wasn't clear. Help me understand. How do we fix this going forward?
Yeah, so you actually have a formula in there. If I noticed the formula, because my tendency would have been like, look, you're supposed to be here at 8. What's the deal? Which is not how you handled it. What you handled it was, hey, we start at 8, and then you used an empathetic question, an empathy follow-up, which was, what happens? Everything okay? Is there something going on? Because it might be a child care issue. It might be a car issue. It might be who knows what kind of issue. So you're using an empathetic, open-ended question to find out what the issue is and to see if there needs to be an adjustment made or anything. You're not trying to embarrass them. You're trying to say, okay, what's the thing that's causing the lateness? Other than, I was looking on social media and hung out at home too long. There's got to be something. That's a whole other conversation, right? So, and then you do a week to 10 day, you're staying on top of it, Lori. The way your hypothetical works, you're staying on top of it. And I get the impression that you've had these conversations before, the way you're saying it. So there's some authenticity to it. So I think those are fantastic. How about the work quality issue? So those are tardiness. Talk to me about work quality, because that's something that makes me totally nuts.
And this is getting to be a greater issue that's coming up in more and more of the conversations I'm having with attorneys, because, whether it's at an associate level or it's at a legal admin level, it's everything in between with, again, here's how I write. Here's the expectations I have for grammar and accuracy and just quality of work product, and that's not being matched, and that is an issue. But we also have to again recognize that, for better or for worse, in some situations, the norms have adjusted, and the emphasis that was formerly put on writing and communication in undergraduate studies just isn't as strong, in my opinion. And we're seeing more and more individuals. And I think the technologies that we're using, the shorthand of texting and other forms of communication that we're using are impacting this as well, as far as the knowledge and understanding of full sentence structures and grammatical rules. So I was working with an attorney, and she was extremely frustrated around the work quality coming for letters that were being drafted by her team. And so we kind of try to troubleshoot on this. And again, it goes back to what we've already said. It needs to be addressed. So we started with having her kind of redline it. But she can't do this every single time, right? Redlining everything. She might as well do it herself. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So let's redline it. Let's meet and let's talk about why these are errors, or why I want to see the edits that I'm proposing here, and then give them another opportunity. In her situation, what we ended up doing was take your letter, and then, so we're not removing their obligation or responsibility to draft that, but let's leverage AI here, and let's put that into AI and have AI do the redlining for them. But also, again, we can use it in a way where it doesn't just rewrite it or do the work for the employee, but actually demonstrates where and how certain changes should be applied to improve the readability, the consistency, the tone, the grammar, whatever it might be. And then the other piece to this is this a growth-minded individual? Is this the great team member that you want on your team? And with support, with training, with education, could blossom into the person that you want them to be, who has really strong work product results? If so, what training, what professional development can you invest in them or recommend to them? And so I've worked with multiple organizations over the years that have a professional development line item on their budget. Most small law firms don't have that. But again, if this is an employee worth investing in, and you have that conversation with them, they're going to feel a greater sense of loyalty and commitment to you, and should want to level up their work if they're seeing that, hey, this is important enough to you that you want to invest in me and a business skill that benefits you while I'm here, but benefits me lifelong.
That's great. That's great. So, in today's age between what Outlook can do, what ChatGPT can do, what Copilot can do, Grammarly, some of the add-on AI products, you can totally get support in writing and drafting. But your point is the predominant point that I was looking for. Is this a growth-minded individual who's trying to improve their skills? Or is this somebody that just has a job that's just trying to get by? If they're growth-minded, I think the burden is on you as a leader to think through what is their ramp of success, what's their trajectory, what's their growth process inside your organization. I think a lot of lawyers never take the time to think through, and team leaders don't think through, how do we grow and promote people inside our organization? Even though you have a small organization, most people that you want to keep there are going to have some form of goal-setting capabilities. They see a bigger future. Now, if you don't create a bigger future inside your organization, they'll find a bigger future outside your organization. So it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be everything from the Migrate Life focus tool that we give all of our clients. It could be everything from a 1-year plan, a 3-year plan, a 10-year plan, whatever it may be. But I think you nailed a big issue, is that in the context of what your development looks like in this organization, here's why you need to learn this skill. And the skill of showing up on time, the skill of writing well, the skill of communicating well. These are critical skills for any professional to advance in their career beyond just communicating, in the moment with somebody. So I think it's a very well done, Lori.
Well, and I'll say too, for those that have, employees early in the infancy of their employment, or that are in the hiring process and looking to bring on new team members, make sure you're documenting these things, because this is going to help you feel more comfortable having those conversations and having those check-ins and giving feedback, because you can go to an onboarding document that says, this is what success looks like for this role. I've hired you based on my optimism and my confidence through the interview process, but now I'm bringing you on, and this is still a trial to see if you're a good fit, and you don't want this to linger beyond. So if you're not demonstrating growth-minded behavior, they're not meeting certain benchmarks, or they're not able to execute the work as it needs to be, those are your indicators that you need to cut ties and go on to the next. And so an onboarding document will outline by the first month, you should be accomplishing and doing these things and performing at this level. Second month, 90 days. You want to try to encapsulate what success looks like, so they know what that roadmap is, and when you're not trending in the direction that you should be.
Sounds like setting expectations from the outset. Once again, we go back to the horrible, horrible definition.
It's an initial work effort, but when we talk about bringing on new team members, the time and effort that you put into developing a strong and strategic onboarding strategy is well worth it. And I work with many firms who, they've had to hire and rehire and, grow their team. And we are always honing the onboarding experience based on the last hire, the last termination, the last whatever, to ensure that any of the things that didn't go right in that experience are incorporated, and we try to identify those earlier than later.
That's a key thing, because a lot of lawyers will say, I can't find good people out there.
Yeah.
And the problem may not be out there. It may be in here, and that you're not clear on your expectations. You're not clear on managing. You're not clear on leading. You're not clear on their path of success inside your organization. And that may be a variety of reasons. You're too darn busy, like you're just crazy busy. You're running as fast as you can. You're chasing cash flow, trying to solve client problems. You're trying to deal with whatever the crisis day jour or day moment is. So these are difficult things. They're not easily done. So as you're listening to this, I want you to listen from the perspective that the way Lori explained is perfect. It's a learning experience. And if you're missing that it's a learning experience, then you're probably too busy. You probably need to listen to some of the time management episodes we've done, or reach out to one of our coaches to work on your time management. Because if you're too busy to think, if you're too busy to learn, if you're too busy to improve, then you're just dooming yourself to a very painful decade of the same day over and over, Groundhog Day, same day over and over. So you've really said some great things.
Well, I'll just emphasize on that just a moment, see, because effective communication is paramount in a manager, but also being able to establish dedicated time to focus on managerial duties and functions, meaning the time with your team, meaning the time to develop or refine processes. It's so crucial if you're going to scale your business and you're going to find and retain the right talent in your business.
You're killing me. So what you're saying is I got to invest time in them and invest training in them
I know.
Put this in my schedule. Do you not understand how busy I am? This will never work.
So I often will talk with attorneys about the short run, long run. This is going to be painful in the short run. You're going to have to try to figure out where you cram this time in the short run. But long term, when you've got 6 months into a new hire and they are checking the boxes against the benchmarks on their onboarding strategy, it's well worth it.
You're killing me. So you're saying short-term pain, long-term pain, choose. Pick one or the other. I'll help you with either. You can do long-term pain and suffer.
We want to be on the hamster wheel because we as effective leaders have to look at themselves objectively and say, how much of this is the fault of my team member versus this is the fault of me and my lack of communication, my lack of documentation, my lack of process, or my lack of comfort with conflict.
My favorite thing about the privilege of being the host of our little Great Life, Great Practice episodes is I learned so much, and you have schooled me on so many things today. So let me ask you one more topic. I want to dig into one more topic, and then we'll set up probably a future conversation. So the one thing that I'm wrestling with is how do I navigate that surprise moment that suddenly feels like conflict? Instead of saying, oh, I've got a client call, I've got to run to my office, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. What are some quick tips that you can give me for navigating conflict in the moment?
All right. Well, you know me, Steve. Quick is never my strength, but I would say if I had to boil this all down, this is a business skill that you have to refine, to learn, to work on, and it doesn't come naturally. So it requires your dedication and it requires you studying it just like you would anything else. There are, some books out there that I think are really helpful, fierce conversations, crucial conversations that can really help with you, again, understanding the dynamics that contribute to these conflict-oriented situations and how you respond to them. And I think we have to recognize too, as I alluded in your example earlier, Steve, we have a script in our own heads about what conflict is and isn't, and what we can and can't say, and what we can and can't do, and what's going to be the result when we do that. We have to unbridle that a little bit and be more objective in these. And again, take on the responsibility of this is a leader quality. This is a managerial duty that has to be addressed. And then the other thing that's been really helpful for me is sometimes, again, you want to be timely in it, but it doesn't mean it has to be now, because I'm a high I on the disc. I'm prone to emotion. I'm prone to people pleasing. And so I need to be able to formulate my approach. And I've had to have a lot of crucial conversations. Before those conversations, I scripted it out. I ran through it in my head. I practiced how I was going to say it, how I was going to deliver it. And it made a world of difference in my ability to deliver effectively without dilution.
Brilliant. This is one of the big issues I think that you've nailed for me, is recognizing when the right time is. This may not be the moment, and I may need to come back, catch my breath, script it out, think about it, practice it with somebody, then set up an appropriate time to have the conversation, and then have the conversation. But the core of it, which I hope everybody heard, is it's a business skill. So it is a business skill, and it's an important business skill as a leader, manager. And I don't care who you are inside the legal organization. I don't care if you're a brand new person that's been there for 2 days. The capability of having these types of conversations is a lifetime skill that you'll continue to develop. But I think the people that develop this skill go further, faster, and more powerfully with less stress than the people that don't. I think a lot of people who don't learn how to develop this particular business skill cap out. Like they can't go further than their ability to manage these types of what you say may or may not be conflicts in the moment. So I think you nailed it, Lori. Really nailed it. Great job today. Anything else that you'd like to say as we close out this particular episode?
Well, again, this is something that needs your attention. If you really want to up level yourself as a leader, as a manager, and again, I can't overemphasize it enough that this is not a natural tendency or a natural skill that many of us have. So it has to come with the ability to carve out the time, recognize where you can improve, what hasn't gone well in the past, and what modifications you can make. But some of this may also be your own self-awareness around it. And some of us lack self-awareness and having conversations with your team, having conversations with your spouse, with your partners, with others who know you well, and identifying what your natural tendencies are is going to be a big help. We lean heavily into DISC at Atticus here, Steve, and so that's a great tool for us. That might be something that you could leverage here, but knowing your tendency around conflict is going to be helpful to rewire yourself and how you're going to approach it in the future.
You can't learn if you don't self-reflect. That's probably the biggest challenge I think that a lot of people have, regardless of your role inside a firm, the ability to take a step back, reflect, and say, how am I doing with this particular skill? How am I doing with this particular issue? So self-reflection, taking a moment to think about it, even writing a plan to improve it is probably the critical go-to thing that I can recommend. Any other resources or anything else that you'd like to put out there, Lori?
I mentioned the 2 books. I think those are very helpful. And then, working with someone who, again, can aid you with the identification of your tendencies, that can walk you through things. This comes up in a lot of the work that I do privately with attorneys, and we're able to, reflect on their tendencies, their style, their approach, and we're able to script out. So, if they bring something to me, I can say, okay, let's script this out. Let's prepare you for this conversation. And so, having a resource like that can be tremendously valuable.
Perfect. So we'll put in the show notes, we'll put the books. We'll also, I'm going to recommend that if you're listening to this and you're not working with us at this moment, you may want to consider working with one of our practice advisors to get coached through and develop your skill, just the way Lori's explaining it. I think that's perfect. So I'll put a link in how to work with a practice advisor as well. I'm trying to think in my head in the past what other episode we've done on this episode. Oh, I know. There's one that we've done on how to manage conflict. I got 2 episodes that I will put in the show notes from the Conflict Management Institute. Past episodes, I'll put those in as well. So Lori, anything else for you before we close it out?
I think that's it. I mean, good luck, lean into conflict and leverage it as an effective tool.
Thank you, Lori. Great job today. I always appreciate you being here. I always appreciate the hard work you do. And I really appreciate the advice that you gave me today at being a better communicator, for lack of a better word. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.